Eric, it feels like forever ago, but 31 years ago this week, we had a whole bunch of WCW talent in ECW. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about 1994, but this is a year before Nitro, and ECW is holding its very biggest event. It's the second annual November to Remember at the ECW Arena in Philadelphia. Now, you might be asking, why are we bringing this up on 83 weeks? Well, because this is the show where Chris Benoit legitimately breaks Sabu's neck. And Shane Douglas does a live promo that in 2 weeks, he's going to be bringing in some help to take on Ron Simmons and Too Cold Scorpio. And that's Steve Austin and the returning Sherry Martel, who had been his manager until she signed with WCW. Let's talk a little bit about the newsletter version of this. I guess Kevin Sullivan is going to be in a match that's announced on TV. And it's written that this was a negotiated settlement between both WCW and ECW, because when the Worlds Collide pay-per-view happened, they had used that name. When Worlds Collide was actually an ECW idea, and now WCW is going to use it with AAA. So maybe there's a talent exchange. Is that the way you remember this coming about, or what led to this unique partnership, as brief as it may have been, between WCW and ECW?
It was just some Paul Heyman fakakta scam to get talent cheap by threatening lawsuits. Paul did that all the time, and he did it effectively because, see, Paul understood, having been in WCW for quite a while and being the intelligent, astute wrestling personality that he was and all that came with it, worker, Paul knew that WCW was very lawsuit adverse. Paul knew, just like I did when I was a talent, because we would joke about it together, that if you sued WCW for $100,000 or less, like if you needed a $75,000 payday, like you're in real financial trouble, you're a talent, not really getting booked much, you need a quick payday, sue WCW for under $100,000 and you're going to get paid. Because the threshold in WCW legal at that time was anything that might possibly get publicity, meaning if it's associated with WCW, and it could hurt Turner Broadcasting and it's under $100,000, just write a freaking check and make it go away. That wasn't my approach. That wasn't Nick Lambros's approach when he came to WCW as an attorney. That wasn't Diane Meyer's approach, who filled Nick Lambros's role with Turner Legal. But that was Turner Legal executive approach: is WCW less than $100,000, potentially embarrassing, write the check. Paul knew that. So whenever there was anything that was a little kabuki-ish that could look like the basis for a legal letter threatening a lawsuit, it would get legal attention, the legal department's attention, which means it would work its way back down through Diana Myers at that time or whomever, and it would work their way down through them to me, and I would be, I want to say forced, but yeah, forced to try to accommodate whatever it is Paul was trying to negotiate as a part of a settlement. That's what that was. There was no cooperative kind of, hey, let's do something together. It was really Paul just leveraging a situation to create a story and get talent that he needed for this event.
Well, Cactus Jack has been allowed to work for ECW while he was under WCW contract through the summer of '94. Terry Funk had been working for both companies simultaneously as well. At this point, did you see ECW as just like an indie date that guys can get on their days off? I mean, I know it has a little bit of internet buzz, but they only had TV in Philadelphia and maybe the Sunshine Network in Florida. And I imagine some of this became kind of controversial because Cactus had spit on the WCW tag team title, trying to get the idea across in his promo that the loss to Sabu meant much more to him than the tag titles. Does a thing like that, when it happens, does it make you less inclined to trust Paul Heyman?
Oh, I never trusted Paul Heyman.
Okay.
Keep in mind, I started working with Paul Heyman in 1987. This is 1994. It's not like I didn't know who Paul Heyman was. And by the way, when I worked with Paul starting in the AWA, I was entry level. Paul had been in the business longer than I had, but Paul was working on the promotional side of the AWA, along with a local promoter from Florida by the name of Rob Russin. So I got a really good look at how Paul operated and who he was for a number of years. So by 1994, and when I say I didn't trust Paul, I mean, I admired him, respected him. I also knew what he was capable of doing as a worker. He was smart, manipulative. He understood the boys, he understood the business, and he understood Turner Broadcasting. So I had a pretty good sense of who Paul Heyman was and what he was capable of in 1994.
How much of this do you think is Kevin Sullivan's closeness with Heyman? It does feel like, since Kevin Sullivan is working his way up to being one of your right-hand guys, and we know that, he has a relationship with Heyman and he liked messing around with ECW. That's got to be the connective tissue between the two organizations. Yeah.
Of course it was. And you really saw that later on when guys started leaving ECW because of, the financial situation they were in. There was, Kevin Sullivan was the pipeline. I mean, he was the gatekeeper for talent that wanted to leave ECW and get a shot in WCW. It all came through Kevin. I didn't even know half the guys. I mean, I knew who they were. I knew their names. If you said their name, I'd be able to picture who they were, but it's not like I followed them, paid attention to their careers and what they were doing and what they were involved with in ECW. I never watched the show, for God's sake. I don't even think I could get it where I lived in Atlanta at that time.
What, if any, value did you think you could extract out of ECW? I only ask because I know that Vince saw value there, almost like a half-assed developmental, or, if he couldn't figure out exactly what to do with a talent, he'd send them down there, see if he couldn't get a fresh coat of paint on them. I don't think that was ever in your plans, though. Was there any value, or was it just doing favors for people that you worked with and were easy?
It was opportunistic. It was an opportunity for, I guess, I don't remember the relationship. I don't know how I let or why I let Cactus Jack work with ECW in 1994. That had to be a unique situation, because I wouldn't do that. And I'll explain why. If someone came to me and said, "Hey, Eric, I have an opportunity to go work a date for a really good friend of mine. I came up in the wrestling business with him and he's got a small promotion. I'd really like to be able to help him out." Keep in mind, WCW talent were under exclusive contracts. There were no relationships with talent under contract that allowed them to work outside of WCW. And one of the reasons was injury. So we make a financial investment, and this is probably still the case today, I'm sure, and in a lot of cases with WWE or AEW for that matter. If you've got really expensive talent or even mid-tier talent, in today's market, if you're paying someone $100,000 a year as a talent, that's a big investment. And the last thing you want after you've had that talent on a roster for 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is, you're trying to develop that talent. The last thing you want is them to go take a date for $50 and break a leg, because now your investment is down the toilet, or at least on hold for a long period of time. And it was that reason why I typically wouldn't let somebody under an exclusive contract do a date for an ECW or anybody else that we didn't have a financial contractual relationship with. So I'd really be curious to how that one happened. That surprises me. Had to be a reason for it. And maybe it was Mick saying, "Hey, I'd really like to do this," and me saying, "Fine, I don't care," for one shot. Maybe that was it. I just don't remember. But I looked at how did I look at them? I didn't. I know it's hard for people to understand now, but if you talk about 1994, ECW didn't exist other than what I'd hear about people talking about. I never saw it on television. It wasn't available. When I did see tape of it, it was like, well, that's certainly not a threat. It wasn't a threat to anybody because I knew it would never be viable for commercial television. Let me give you an example. Now I'm going to keep that discussion out of it. Never mind. There's, to be fair to the audience, there is a mixed martial art promotion out there that I personally enjoy watching. And it's very physical. It's bare knuckle fighting championship. I can't talk around it. David Feldman, Cyrus Fees, who's one of their announcers. I've been to a couple of their shows. Their fighters are great people. The shows are unbelievable. They're really, really great MMA shows, but they're bare knuckle. So it's a little bloody, as one could imagine. Head wounds typically are in the second or third round when your heartbeat's going about 140 or 160 beats a minute and you got a gash in your head or face. It gets really ugly really fast. It makes it hard for linear television to embrace, or advertisers, right? ECW was that to professional wrestling. Even though it was professional wrestling, scripted entertainment, it was so gory, so bloody that I knew at that time there was no reason to pay attention to it as a potential competitor, because that product would have never made it to primetime competitive television. Could it live in sub-cable universes, small cable universes? Sure. Little local independent stations where you had to wrap yourself in aluminum foil and stand on a roof with a television on your lap. Yeah, they could get on TV there. Eventually they made it to TNN, but probably had to tone down the programming accordingly. But in 1994, I just didn't care, to be honest with you.
Hey, did you know you can own for less than your current rent? We can help at savewithconrad.com. Stop throwing your money away on rent. You don't know any wealthy renters. Start building wealth for your family with my family at savewithconrad.com.